And hello once again as we recap week number 4. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie with you with another Friday Night Drive recap podcast. And we're recovering from the weekend that was. Souce, have you recovered nicely? And are you just starting to kind of like let things clear a little bit? We're getting to that curtain where we're kind of peeking behind it to see what that playoff bracket will look like.
Yeah, you start to get a little bit more clarity at this point because you're starting to get some games and then future games where you actually have a little bit of comparative result study that you can usually do. That will come a little bit more, and each week we'll get a little bit more of that, but there could be some teams out there that you're a little confused about, and now all of a sudden they have a common opponent. So it's not an exact science, but sometimes you get wildly different results against the same opponent, and that will give you a clue as to how maybe you can separate two teams that you have graded pretty close together. So we're definitely starting to get to that point now where it might not be a flashy game. It might not be a game between, two undefeated teams, but it might be a game. It might have been a game between 1-2 teams that you were just trying to get a better perspective on where those teams were at. So there were a lot of those games this week. And it wasn't just in the undefeated teams classification as well, because as we well know, by looking at this for a long period of time, all the games affect all the other ones. Yeah. So you basically, they all fit into the puzzle somehow. It might not make sense to you how 1A results affect the 8A field, but they do. So it's definitely one of those things you're starting to see a little bit more. The picture's a little less fuzzy around the edges. There's still a lot of not clarity there, but you're getting to the point now where you can start to maybe pinpoint some things because of the information that you already have.
Yeah, in each of the last 2 years, I am proud to have brought that to the forefront early to say, okay, that game matters for this team, and just doing that playoff point sorting out, so to speak. And we're going to talk a little more about playoffs as we go here, especially when we get to the classifications, because we know that there's still some novelty to it because we haven't gotten to it and the changes that are coming. So hold that thought when we get to it. But we want to hear your thoughts as we see you in the chat there. So if you're watching us live, jump on in on YouTube for sure. If you're watching us wherever on your favorite podcast outlet, we appreciate that. And we'll continue forward with the week that was. And I want to start with the Catholic League. Because there's so much to sort out, and an impressive element of teams that kind of rose to the forefront this weekend. And I think the first one is Montini. And not so much because of their offense, but that was one heck of a defensive stop they had against Fenwick to prevent the 2-point conversion in order to get the win. One of those games, one of 38 games that we had this weekend that were decided by a touchdown or less, all ending up with one of the 69 unbeaten teams of 4-0, the Montini Broncos. How good are they? How scary can they be? We know they were rolling through 3A. 4A seems to be they're the favorite at this point, for sure.
It's a far cry from a couple of years ago when Montini had a couple of back-to-back 3-6 seasons where the thought process was, we think we have a good football team, but the schedule is it's overwhelming us. Mm-hmm. And they broke through last year, and look what happened. They win a state championship. So, they go from not being in the field to winning a state title. So that all that revolution is what, ends up happening. And that's happening for a lot of Catholic League teams. They get into this situation. They may be a very good football team, but it seems like every week they're just running into a brick wall. And you're seeing that now with some of the marquee programs in the Catholic League that are sitting there with 1-3 records, and in someone like Maris's case, 0-4. And that's a nod to the quality of the schedule that they're playing, and they very well might be good teams. They might be teams worthy of not only getting into the field, but making some noise if they get there. But right now, it looks like it's going to be extremely difficult for some of those teams to actually even just get a chance at this thing.
We're going to have to break down those 0-4 and 1-3s at some point, maybe not this week, but down the road here as we get a little bit closer to even more so desperation of like, you've got to win the rest of the way to kind of see, can they run the table? We'll have to kind of play that game of can they run it as we go in the weeks ahead. But, Montini was able to get that big play, to get that stop, to get that win. We saw that with Nazareth as well, to, using a sophomore left-footed kicker to come up with a big win in a game that you and I were watching. It was as entertaining as it's been all season long with Nazareth taking out IC Catholic.
Yeah, that was a really entertaining game to watch, like you said. And for me, it was about defining some things. Like we talked about before, there were some games out there this week that you were like trying to get a picture of exactly what these teams might be. And even though IC Catholic lost that game, it was something that, to me, that was kind of, it's hard to plant a flag in a loss, but I think they may have accomplished that. Yeah. They might have said, hey, look at what we just did. We hung in there. It was a last end of the game possession that got this win for Nazareth. And Nazareth is a consensus top 10 team. And I said IC Catholic took them to the brink. And when you look at it logically, if IC Catholic can get in, that's a 3A team in the postseason. And I know no one wants to see them in the playoff draw because they're probably going to pick up a few losses. They're probably going to be a double-digit seed. And in 3A, they're gonna end up weirdly as probably one of the teams you're labeling as a possible favorite, and they might have a 13 or a 14 next to their name. I've done the projection for this week. I won't spoil it. That comes out on Wednesday. But where they're sitting is almost comical when you think of it. So and the team on the other side is, if that materializes in that way, we'll look at it and go, what the? That's
and what we're going to have to guess that it's a team from Ogle County or near that area that's going to be really, really frustrated to see them a little closer than they should.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible.
But
oh no.
Yeah, that's one of those things. But yeah, that's the makeup of this thing. But you're looking at IC Catholic now, and I'm saying, hey, I don't know. I think they'll manage to get to the 5, but maybe that's trying to tell us, we're not thinking about 5. We're thinking about 6. We're thinking about 7. We believe we're capable of that. So then that would obviously change the landscape for IC Catholic. So I think that it was interesting for both teams. Big win for Nazareth. Gets them at 3-1. Puts them in really good position. We all know the drama that they've had in the past with getting just to qualifying standards.
Sure. Does Nazareth breathe the sigh of relief for getting that win?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those things that's like, you look at there's only 3 teams left in the Catholic League that are 4-0 at this point in time. So they're in really good shape, obviously. Potentially, they really only need one more. And in some cases might not even need to do that. So they're in great shape. But that 3-win group, you got to be feeling pretty good about yourself right now. And there's a couple in there that a little surprising to see them there. I will admit, if you would have told me St. Patrick was going to be 3-1 out of the gate, I would have been surprised by that.
Especially
so that's a team that's
nice. Yeah, I go back and look at that St. Patrick Yorkville game in week 1 and go, man, that told us a lot more than we thought. And it was a defensive grinder, if you recall correctly. So, and then Yorkville's one of those teams at 4-0. So we'll get down to that in just a minute here. But let's flip the script a little bit and talk a little bit about JCA and what we saw with JCA and Maris over the course of this past Game 4. And you and I were watching that down to the wire. A wild finish where a field goal attempt went awry, so to speak, in terms of the snap. But there's Lucas Simlick saving the day and finding Declan Walker. Is it Declan Wagner? I wanted to call him Declan Walker. So sorry about to the Wagner family. But Declan, with that catch, it just shows the smart instincts that program has. And that's not saying that other programs don't, but boy, it shows a lot about what the coaching staff has ingrained in them. They know to figure out how to get around it in that kind of situation. 2 seconds, 1 second on the clock. You have the wing running that route and the quarterback understanding that the hold for the field goal is not going to happen. I've got to make a play, and they did.
Yeah, that was clutch. You look at the situation that they had gotten themselves into in the previous 3 weeks, the fact that they were able to soldier up and kind of say, hey, if we want it, if we still have a chance to get where we want to go, and the only way that's going to happen is we got to get this done right now. We'll worry about, the next couple of weeks when we get there, but the first step is making sure that we get this win tonight. And it was against a team that was in the same boat, so it wasn't like they were going to lay off the accelerator or whatever. Maris needed that win just as badly, if not worse. So it was one of those situations where you saw the clutch come out in there and get that done, because it was easily a play that could have devolved into nothing, and we went to overtime, and who knows what happens in that game. So looked like they were lining up for a potentially makeable field goal in that situation, and then it could have all come apart, but they focused up and got it done. I still think, even though that's a 1-3 football team, I'm reluctant to put them away despite the schedule that they have there. I still think that maybe they can put some things together. Granted, brutal next 2 weeks. Nazareth next week, Mount Carmel the following week. I mean, that's a lot. All right. I mean, yeah.
And it proves why they absolutely had to have it against Maris, because you can't go 0-4 into that. Otherwise, you're really staring at 0-6, and it's night time for them. And you're looking ahead to playing young kids and trying to figure out what you have going down to the rest of the way. And also, you don't even get Catholic League playoff opportunities. You don't get Prep Bowl opportunities when you go that far down the wagon. So, at least you're looking at this point putting something together to be past week 9 in some capacity. And that's what one of the Catholic League's teams look at that. I mean, that's the advantage that they have versus some of the other state teams, because they have the ability to look at when we get to 7, 8, 9, and we know maybe this isn't going to happen from an IHSA standpoint. You still have the Catholic League playoffs to maybe get 1 or 2, maybe even more games out of that to finish the season. Yeah,
it's definitely kind of a function of how they do things. Obviously that's not the ideal.
No,
but you still want to give yourself an opportunity to do that if that's what you have. So if you don't at least string some of these wins together, you're not even in consideration for something like that.
Let's wrap up the Catholic League from a standpoint of Brother Rice and Loyola, because the more I read about Loyola and the more I reflect on what I saw against them what I saw with them against St. Francis a week and a half ago at this point, I have to be very impressed with what Brother Rice did in a rather controlling fashion to get that win over the Ramblers.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen a lot. I mean, Loyola doesn't lose a lot of regular season games against Illinois-based teams. There have not been a lot of them. And for the last couple of years, Brother Rice has been recognized as a team that has quite a bit of talent. But for whatever reason, they haven't been able to quite put it all together consistently. There were flashes. There were times when you're like, "Oh, look at what Brother Rice did," but it just didn't seem to come to the fruition every week. That is one thing that they have done this year. They have brought it every single week, and that's why they're 4-0 right now. And to be honest with you, I think we're looking for clarity in a Class 7A field that I think a lot of people think is wide open, with Mount Carmel being bumped up to Class 8A. I think we might have our favorite mantle that we can place on somebody in 7A right now. I think it's Brother Rice, personally.
Brother Rice, I mean, you could talk about Downers Grove North. You could talk about St. Charles North being a contender if they're in that class, and that changes things too. And we'll talk about that as we continue on. But for them to be able to contain Jordan McKinney, as much as they were able to do so, this is a kid with some size, some speed, and he's a sophomore. And one of the athletes that certainly, when you watch any football program, it doesn't take long for you to go, "Who's that kid?" That's just sight unseen without a program in your hand. That's certainly something that I noticed when I was able to watch them. So with Brother Rice getting, go ahead.
Let me tell you a story about Jordan McKinley.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was at a prospect showcase, and it was basically for kids to get looks from college coaches and stuff like that. And I spotted this kid that I'd never seen before. I didn't know who he was, and I looked at the little program book that they'd given me, looked at the number. Said Jordan McKinley on it. And I looked at it, and at the time, this was a couple years ago, mind you, it indicated what 8th grade he was in. He was in 8th grade. And he looked like he was legitimately could have been a senior in high school. Could have passed easily for a senior in high school. That was my first and he was lighting up people in that showcase as an 8th grader. So I knew, I filed that name away, and I said, maybe as soon as next year, we will all know who Jordan McKinley is, and we're finding out.
We're finding out for sure.
By the time he's a senior, he is going to be the name. I think he's special. He's a special talent.
Yeah, he's going to be an absolute monster in Illinois football. And if you haven't seen him play, you will see him play. And it's one of those, man among boys type of athletes who can run the Wildcat, no less. That's what they're doing the kid. It's awesome. We need to take a timeout. When we come back, we talked about how the Catholic League might be the best league. The Mid-Illini Conference is probably the most fun. We're going to explain why when we come back. Also, you want to talk about some of the playoff aspects of it, how the enrollments will shake out, and the changes that we've had with the IHSA that are going to be coming once we get past week 9. We're going to start to kind of drip that out a little bit so that you have a better understanding about what you should be looking for when you're looking at these playoff projections that will come out this week. It is Friday Night Drive as we recap week number 4 here on Shaw Local.
I'm State Representative Steve Reich. Since 2017, I've led the fight to reform our child welfare system and supported educational choice for every kid in Illinois. I've worked to stop the collapse of our public pensions while standing up for businesses that are being crushed by crippling mandates. And I've never forgotten who pays the bill. The work isn't finished, and as I run for re-election, I'm asking for your support. I'm Steve Reich, and I approve this message.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brenton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
In Illinois and into Iowa, the story of Shaw Media is a story of trust. Since 1851, we've been informing, connecting, and reflecting the communities we serve, large and small, rural and urban, suburban, and river towns alike. With dozens of local newspapers, radio stations, magazines, and specialty brands like Friday Night Drive and Starve Rock Country, we meet people wherever they are. We shine a light on local government. We celebrate Friday night touchdowns. We tell the stories that shape your day, from neighborhood heroes to the Chicago Bears. But what truly sets us apart? It's our people. The award-winning journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers who live here, work here, and care deeply about what matters most to you. We don't just report the news. We're part of the fabric of the places we serve, from the Mississippi to the Illinois, from the Fox all the way to the chain of lakes. Trusted for generations, still earning it every day. Shaw Media, your most trusted local source.
And welcome back as we continue on recapping week number 4, Friday Night Drive podcast here on Shaw Local. Matt Rodewald, Steve Soucie. We've got a bunch of things that we've kind of talked about so far, but we also have a whole list of, I have a whole list of random 4-0s, and I love these facts. We're going to get to those towards the end. Random small schools, not just in our area, so to speak, in Northern Illinois, but we probably haven't done it enough, to be fair. Shout outs to some Central and Southern Illinois schools throughout the course of this podcast throughout the last month or so. So we're going to tip our cap to those teams as well. And also we'll talk about the Mid-Illini as well. Before we get to the playoff aspect, I want to ask you about Saturday, because we had 2 big ones on Saturday. What caught your eye with the wins for Glenbard West and Hinsdale Central?
Well, I think the one thing that I noticed, I watched a large chunk of the Glenbard West game. Glenbard West, boy, they really looked pretty dominant in that game. They got A.J. Rayford back under center. Yeah. That makes a difference for them. They've been effective without him. They're more effective with him. So, I mean, that was a very impressive showing for them against a Downers Grove North team that was obviously shorthanded. Owen Lansu with an injury that they're hoping he'll be able to get back for over the course of the rest of by the end of the season. Not sure. Minnesota recruit, it's a leg injury of some kind. I'm not sure of the exact specifics of it, but they're not sure if he's going to come back, and obviously that makes a huge difference to that program. So they're still trying to kind of adjust to having someone else under center there. It's been Lansu's gig for a while now, so just making that happen. And the one thing about it is, fortunately for Downers Grove North, they got off to that 3-0 start, so they do have a little bit of cushion, at least as regards to getting into the playoffs. But this conference schedule is going to be brutal. I mean, it just really is.
It really is.
Getting to 5 is a lot more complicated than it may have been in a few years prior. So definitely kind of a tricky slope for them the rest of the way. But it looks like there's a path there for them to at least get into playoffs and hopefully get him back. But the prospects for them are different than they were a few weeks ago. That's for sure.
Yeah, and even getting him back, say at 80% for a Week 10 playoff game, if they're 9-0, 8-1 like we've seen, that's fine. But when you're 5-4, your opponent is a little different in that first round. That makes the road a lot tougher, and you're probably going to be on the road, which isn't too much of an issue for a lot of these coaches because, as you know, in Illinois, you have to win on the road at some point, pretty much, to end up winning a state championship. But I want to switch over to Hinsdale Central because you and I have talked about them since the beginning of the season. But the Nico Mann pick and the Dominic Tressner touchdown run in back-to-back sequences, talk about flipping the script against Lions and spoiling their homecoming. The Red Devils have figured out ways to win big games, and they are competitive. But the problem I have is they're going in the wrong class, in Class 8A, and they're going to be a matchup nightmare for somebody, but how deep can they go?
Yeah, it's interesting because, you kind of look at where they were at. They lost the previous week, but they bounced back really nice against this Lions team that I still like a lot. So, and they really kind of controlled that game, like you said, turned it kind of on its ear and took over and finished it. I mean, that's one of the things that they needed to be able to do. It's one of the things maybe that they've struggled to do over the last couple of years. They've been competitive in some games. They just haven't been able to finish them. So now, good shape, 3-1. Got a couple of the real problematic games behind them. So now maybe they can stack a few more, get themselves towards maybe the middle of that draw. That would be okay for them. It would kind of maybe keep them away from some of the beasts right off the bat.
Yeah.
So, and I do think they're a really good football team, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them, finish out maybe at 7-2, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yep.
And put themselves, right kind of smack the middle in the draw. So that was a really nice win for them. I was really impressed by that. And once again, I still think Lions is more than capable of bouncing back from this and putting their ship in the right direction as well.
All four of those teams, mostly 8A, but Downers Grove North, based on their situation too, and if they're healthy, they're going to be the worst thing you see in the second round. Whoever ends up with them, we got to play them. Or in some case, with Downers Grove North, if they win their first game on the road at a 5-4, then someone's got to go to them in the second round. That's not going to work out very well either. So let's talk about the play. Go ahead.
Matt, I wouldn't put all my chips on Glenbard West being an 8A. I'll just say that.
Okay, we'll hold that for a second because we've seen them kind of dance in the past, and so looks like we're gonna do that again with Glenbard West. Good hint and good segue as we move on over to the playoff aspect of it. You've had people talking to you about playoffs and about just not so much the confusion, but looking for clarity. Things to look for when it comes to this new setup and new classification setup, with some of these teams. What are some of the things that are coming to mind when you think of that? You've had a chance to pore over this for at least 6 to 8 months, but where have you settled with some of this stuff and some of these issues at this point?
Well, there are two pieces to this conversation. One from a little farther back. One happened this week. So there are two different things here. The first one being the one that's a little bit more farther back is that we've just simply got more teams that are multiplied this year. And there are less teams that are utilizing the multiplier waiver. So those classes that you're used to some of these schools being in, they're not. Mostly, private, non-boundaried schools are probably going to be a class higher than you're used to seeing them in.
Let me stop you right there. Can you give me two examples just off the top so we can tangibly talk about this?
Montini would be one, for example.
Okay.
Last year they were in 3A. They had what was classified as a multiplier waiver. They no longer have that. So their enrollment, their actual enrollment is timed by 1.65 to get their current enrollment.
Okay.
Last year it was not multiplied by 1.65. So that is why Montini, who won a 3A state championship, will be nowhere near 3A when the pairings come out.
Yes.
They will be almost certainly in 4A, but possibly 5A. That's one. The other big one in terms they look like they may not be making the playoffs, but the one that's the most dramatic jump is the one of DePaul Prep. That's a combination of one being multiplied and two, the fact that the school's actual enrollment has grown immensely over the last 3 years. So the enrollment number that we're using back in the previous system, much lower than what the actual enrollment is now. Now they are also multiplied. So they're actually going to rocket from 4 to 7. But that's what's going on with the multiplier. So that's just in general, there's just more teams being multiplied now. In the past, there were 20. There's closer to 60 now.
Wow.
So that's a big impact. And then the multiplier waiver is only being utilized by 8 to 10 schools now. You have to actually ask for the multiplier waiver to be granted, and then the IHSA has the discretion to decide whether or not you actually qualify for it. So there were some schools that asked for it and were denied it. So there aren't a lot of schools that are actually utilizing a multiplier waiver as they have, and they've had a lot of schools have had in the past. So
are you willing to share who got denied, or is that kind of
I know some of them.
Okay.
But they haven't put it in public record. I only know the ones that I know because they told me they applied for them, and I know that they didn't get them simply looking at the number. So I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole, who told me this and who told me that thing. But
well, I want to do that to you, but I would say that's one of those things where you might, if a real sleuthy person could use some good old-fashioned board meeting minutes to figure out whether it's an athletic director's report on that. That's just telling you where the journalist in me would go to try and figure that out. So go ahead. I keep interrupting. My apologies.
So then let's transition to the second part of this issue now.
Okay.
So earlier this week, I learned from the Illinois High School Association that all of the numbers for the public schools that were reported to them in August were incorrect. So almost 400 schools saw an enrollment adjustment to their number this week. So some of the adjustments were small. Every one of the schools that was adjusted went down, except for 3. 3 went up, and the numbers were not that big, for the most part. But the range of the way that they went down was as small as maybe 1 or 2, and as large as 300. So the large ones were at the larger schools. So we basically had to adjust a lot of schools. But where this all came into play was you had the schools that were around the bubble. If you're a school around the bubble, maybe you had a 10 student adjustment. But the school next to you that was also on the bubble had a 3 student adjustment. So you had schools jumping up maybe 2 or 3 spots on the chart, or 1 or 2 spots down. And when we came through to that, basically what happened was we just had a lot of schools that were moving up and down on the slots, but only a couple of spaces. So basically, some schools would move up 5 or 6 spots. Some schools might not move at all. But the ones that moved 5 or 6 spots, if they were on the bubble and they were formerly a large 3A school, a small 3A school, and they moved up the chart 5 or 6 spots, then all of a sudden they're a big 2A school. So a lot of those schools around the bubble were moving around based on how many students they got subtracted from their overall enrollment number. So it became a big-time discussion this week of, okay, how does this affect individual programs? And as I went through the projection, the process of the projection this week, I noticed there were some schools that previously were in one classification that had jumped down and replaced others that maybe their enrollment went down, but it didn't go down as much as some of the other schools in their situation. That was what it all led to. So the long and short of all of this is, yes, all of the enrollments were changed this week, other than one school, oddly enough. Bismarck-Henning's number did not change at all. It was exactly the same as it was the week before. But other than 3 schools, and their numbers did not go up substantially enough to change them at all. What really happened was we had to really take a look at the bubbles and where we were at with these bubbles. It was kind of a tricky situation to kind of figure out, but ultimately, there were only a couple schools that made a dramatic change. Peoria would be one of them. They were one of those schools that changed almost 300 students on their enrollment. So we were looking at it early in the process. They looked like they were pretty locked into 6A. After that adjustment, they looked pretty locked into 5A. So now it becomes, okay, where were you on the bubble between the 2 classifications, and how many students did your enrollment change? If it changed 1 or 2 students, likely didn't make big of an impact. But when we're talking about 1, 2, 3A, and even 4A, the numbers are not that big separating the lines. I mean, 10 students jump one way or another, that can change your status pretty quickly. So it became a really interesting discussion this week, figuring out who gained the most, who lost the most. It was tricky to figure it all out, but once we did, what it ultimately led to is those teams on the bubble kind of changed, and some of those teams that were on the bubble aren't on the bubble anymore. They moved deeper into the classes with a bit of an enrollment dip. So it's all one of those situations, and we had to figure all of that out. So in a nutshell, that is what happened this week. And I had a lot of people asking me what it all meant. And that's really what it came down to. So, when we broke it down, that was what we came to the conclusion of. So it was an interesting week for kind of the machinations of how the playoffs are going to look in 5 weeks. This has never happened before. We've never had an enrollment adjustment like this in season. So, but we had to do it because the numbers were discovered as incorrect, and they were incorrect on such a large scale. It wasn't a situation where we could go, okay, we're going to adjust these 5 teams that it affected, and here's what it caused. Literally, every school that does not have a multiplier situation on them, a non-private school, for example, had some sort of adjustment made to their enrollment number. So that's the 5-minute summary of what happened earlier this week. What it all means, we don't know quite yet. So we're going to figure that all out as we go this week. So obviously, you picked up on by this time, we had a connection problem with Matt, so he dropped off of this broadcast. So we're going to try to get him back, but now I'm going to be joined by...
We are going to try to get him back.
Okay.
Everybody dropped off. I'm the producer here at Live with Friday Night Drive. Just a bad connection for Matt, unfortunately. But I do want to ask Steve, after that incredible explanation for what's going on, what was the reaction among schools and coaches when all of a sudden something big like that changes?
I think the biggest thing that was kind of fed to me was, everybody wanted to kind of know what it was. And then when I did the actual breakdown, when I explained to people that it wasn't ping-ponging all over the place, that it was generally everybody went down, it was just a matter of what degree did they go down, I think there would have been more of a violent reaction if it would have been, okay, these 50 went up, these 50 went down, these guys kind of went up and down in the middle. So it became a little bit like there was not a lot of reaction to it. I also don't know if it's completely common knowledge at this point in time either, because it was something that was kind of given to me. The information was given to me on Tuesday of last week, and I just kind of started to parcel together what it meant. And I was still kind of going through it even on Thursday and Friday when we were getting week 4 games. So it has been a interesting week in the goop of the IHSA playoff breakdown field, because a lot of stuff changed this week, and I honestly don't know if a lot of people knew that.
Well, the technical monster tried to eat my phone, so apologies for that. I'm trying to we're trying to shake out the new iOS system on my side. The IHSA is trying to figure out new enrollment data. And I think both of those things are in tandem, because it's going to take a couple weeks to sort of figure some things out, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's like I touched on it a little bit with the projection situation. Usually at this time of year, I'm moving maybe 3 or 4 teams, up or down, or a new team in, or whatever. This week I had a class, there are 8 different teams in that field than there were last week, and it was largely due to some of these enrollment switches. There was another there were 6 changes, and you're just seeing it on the bubbles. The bubble teams are different on both sides, like the short side, the long side. They're just, some of the names are changing, and it's because of this team dropped 22, this team dropped 7. And then when you have such small schools together, that's a big difference. It doesn't seem like a lot, yeah. But when the line is 400 kids and one is minus 22 and one is minus 7, it's going to matter, especially if both of those teams were in the same place before.
Well, this makes it one of the more anticipated mid-season projections I can recall, just because it's going to look totally different than what you saw the previous week, which is great. So make sure you look for that when you look at Shaw Local and shawlocal.com and FridayNightDrive.com tomorrow or the next few days here if you haven't had a chance to do so. I want to switch to a couple things because I don't know when the monster is going to come back and eat my phone again. I want to bring up Glenwood. Can we do that? Downstate, Glenwood's win over Rochester in overtime, 43-42. Their first home win against Rochester since 2007. I was going to ask you this at the outset. I know it's East St. Louis in the south. Who comes out of the north? Can Glenwood space themselves far enough away to make a run at least to the semis to face them? How do you think 6A is going to work?
Well, the first thing you have to consider is Glenwood's in 5 right now.
That's right.
So right now, and they're
I keep doing the state rankings in my head.
The teams that are very close to that line, Glenwood is one of them. So they're bouncing back between 5 and 6. But the interesting thing about East St. Louis that you have to consider, at least where they end up falling in the bracket, they've already got 2 losses. So right now, that likely means East St. Louis is probably going to be a 7, and even if they don't lose another game, like if they're and they have IMG in week 9. Mm-hmm. So that, like, I think I think they're probably a 6-3 football team when we come to the seeding process, and that's probably going to put them 8, 9, 10 on the seed chart. So, I mean, you can't control it because even if you're the 1, maybe St. Louis ends up as the 8, and all of a sudden, second round, how you doing? There you are. Yep. So it's like, so that's that's the tricky element of it. It's like, okay, it's not like we can go into the 6A bracket saying, okay, if we can get to the 1 or 2 line, they'll be on the other one. That's not the way this works. No. So it's like, so even if you do achieve great success, run the table, it's all a variance on where East St. Louis ends up with their record. If they're 6-3, they could be anywhere in that draw in the south. Yep. They're both going to be the south side, but I mean, they could be 7, they could be 9, they could be 11. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
And those that complain, and I get it, I totally get it. You go 10-0, and you're like, come on, we got East St. Louis waiting right for you in the second round. Totally understand the frustration. But when you look at the greater good of this whole process, the imperfect system is.
I think the monster got us again. So, to finish on Matt's point, I think that's one of the things about this system. Sometimes it makes it difficult, but it also, and eventually, I think it feels like it kind of sometimes evens things out as well. So, there's a lot of nuance to the playoff system, that you take into account when it's put together. Would the ideal be, sitting down and seeding once you figured out who the qualifying teams are? Maybe. But the one thing about this is it's transparent. You can see exactly how it works, and if you're willing to put in the time, you can see how and why it breaks down the way that it does. So you don't get a situation of potential bias. It's not perfect. There are situations like this that make it an imperfect system, but it also is one that is explained if you want to be able to do it. So, when we look at it overall, that's the thing. So, when we talk about 6A in general, I think that's one of the interesting things to look at. You look at the teams that have left 6A potentially. Batavia, St. Rita, Richards. These are all teams that have made a postseason impact. So you're going to have a different feel because those 3 teams have all moved up. So they're in that situation. But conversely, those are being replaced in some sense. Nazareth is coming up to 6A because of the success formula. If Joliet Catholic qualifies, they'll also be in 6A because of the success formula. So there's a nice little kind of trade-off effect going on there in regards to you have those 3 teams moving up that have had some success at 6A, Batavia, Richards, St. Rita. They're all going up to 7A. St. Rita's done this before. This isn't a big surprise. But Batavia and Richards are new to this process. But you move those teams up from 5A to 6A. Antioch is another one. That is moving up in that situation. So, you look at those teams, they kind of filter in those spots. So it would have been interesting if those teams would have stayed Batavia Richards to see how loaded 6A would have potentially been. But I think you're going to have an interesting field either way. But I'm keeping a big eye on Glenwood at this point in time. So I think with the technical problems that we've having on tonight, I think we're going to wrap it up there. But keep your eyes on Friday Night Drive for the rest of the week. Obviously, we've been talking about it a lot tonight. The new playoff projection will come out on Wednesday, but we'll also have lots of other content all over the site leading into Week 5. So everybody have a good week, and let's all look forward to Week 5. Thanks.